welcome officially to the Sunday Business Sermon on Writing and Publishing Cookbooks. And I do have a guest with me today. Before I introduce her, I want to first thank the sponsor for this month, the month of April, which is PubSite. PubSite is a DIY website platform especially crafted for authors. So if you've been looking for a website builder, and you're looking for something that's made with authors in mind, then you'll want to take a look at PubSite. And I've got a QR code here that goes to the link that you see on the screen. They do have a 14-day trial period. It's a build-it-yourself platform, so you do have to do some work, but I've seen the back end and it's like filling in the blanks, so it's pretty user-friendly. So thank you to PubSite for sponsoring my newsletter and these sessions in April. Now, today's guest, very excited to bring you Sally Ekus from the Ekus Group. She is owner and lead agent. She's brokered over 300 cookbook deals, and she represents a wide range of culinary, health, wellness, and lifestyle talent, from first-time cookbook authors to seasoned chefs, professional food writers, and bloggers. She works with the big 5 publishers as well as all of the independent houses. And she also interestingly facilitates media training workshops to help authors gain confidence to promote their work. So if you were here, you might have heard Sally encourage someone in the chat to promote their work by at least mentioning their title, which thumbs up. Yes, absolutely. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share because we're going to be running this mainly as an open Q&A. I'm going to start off with some of the questions I have, because this isn't an area where I actually hear a lot of discussion. And I sometimes hear conflicting advice too. So I want to get some questions settled for myself. Now, I'll start with the big one that writers ask me about all types of nonfiction, which is, how big of a platform do I need? Does it have to be an online platform? Do I have to be famous? Do I have to be on food TV, et cetera, et cetera? So can you give us kind of what the expectations are? And I imagine it differs by publisher size as well.
So we're going to start right off the bat with the platform question. I love it.
Yeah.
Jane, thank you so much for having me on today. So the answer is yes. It depends to everything in cookbook publishing and beyond. I think, and I have lived the experience as an agent, that having a bigger platform helps open doors wider and faster. And I'm an agent that likes to kind of, kindly kick down doors no matter the size of my client's platform, because platform is defined in different ways by different publishers, by different authors, by your topic, by the time. And so what I define as platform is an author's community and ability to reach them. And so now the first thought is social media. It is not the only way you can define somebody's platform. And the reason, let's just talk about social media as platform for 1 minute, and then I can talk about other forms of platform. The reason the desire or the demand by especially the big 5 for your numbers to be so high is because now we have enough information about a reader or customer's conversion to buying your book. And we know it's just a tiny percentage of your following. So the bigger your following, the bigger that percentage, though small, probably like 1 to 3%, convert to book sales. So when we talk about, you need this big social following, yeah, it really helps. It helps open an agent door. It helps open a publishing door. However, our agency has historically worked with many first-time authors that have then gone on to write more books, and many first-time authors don't have huge social platforms. And so we also look at, do you have a regular byline somewhere? Are you positioned as an expert in what you want to say, cooking or otherwise, for those listening? Have you been quoted? Have you been on television? Have you appeared at different conferences to lecture as an expert on X topic? Platform to me is showing that you are an expert in your field, and also you're amplifying being that expert. You're not an unknown expert yet. I'm also looking for things like showing that you know how to reach your intended customer, such as using classes or a shop that you might have on your site to generate revenue. Maybe that's a proof of concept that you know how to reach your audience and convert them to a sale of some kind. That's the kind of information I look for in a proposal when it comes to talking about somebody's platform.
That's super helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, let's say you have uh, a decent platform, something that would get an agent or a publisher interested, and you've got a great idea. Now, when you put together a book proposal, which I assume would be required in this, are there special types of information that you're looking for in a cookbook book
In the
proposal
proposal.
that might not be in another one? Like, do you need finished photos of recipes or something like that?
It depends what you're pitching. So we have guidelines on our website that I'm sure you'll send out afterwards that are completely representative of pitching any cookbook agent. And it walks you through every section of a book proposal. So the concept, the overview, who you are, your press, marketing, media, your platform. And then if you're talking about the vision of your book, what you want your book to look and feel like, and particularly with cookbooks, many people pitching cookbooks at this point have a sense of, at least, do they want hardcover or soft cover, or do they want photos with every recipe?
Mm-hmm.
We could have a whole conversation about yay or nay on that.
Yeah.
If you have a specific vision, then pitch that vision. And it might mean including photos of your food. If you're wanting to be the photographer, then I would suggest putting in samples. If you want to work with a specific photographer that you have a contact with, put in those samples. And if you're not sure how to handle it, educate yourself on the language that should go in a proposal around being open to that collaborative process. Generally speaking, in a cookbook proposal, you'll have anywhere from 8 to 10 finished, fully tested recipes. And at this point, many cookbook proposals have some sort of pretty highly visual component to them. Should you pay out of pocket for that sample recipe photography? It's very nuanced depending on what you want to show. I saw someone in the chat earlier, mention wanting to do recipes that are without some of the top 8 to 10 allergens. My immediate thought is you would want to show some of those recipes, because our mind immediately goes to, well, how do I cook without, grains and eggs and dairy and seeds? I want to see those recipes, even if it's just a sample of what you've published elsewhere, maybe on your blog or online somewhere on social. You can make it clear these are sample images, but you're illustrating the idea that you're putting forward.
Is it, well, I'll start with an example from my publishing background. We did a lot of highly illustrated books, but we never expected the author to produce that photography because we had an in-house photo studio. In the realm of cookbooks, what do you see as most common? Is it the publisher that would be handling it? Is it the author? It just really depends on who's best equipped.
It completely depends. More and more, the authors are responsible for delivering the photos in their book as part of the contractual delivery obligations. However, many times the author is not the one to actually shoot and take those photos. So, for example, many of the big 5 require authors to both be financially responsible for the delivery in terms of earning out that component of their advance, and some even note what part of the advance is going to be allocated for photos and needs to be earned back. So we can get into that if you want. But many times the author is responsible for delivering them, and how the financials of that is sort of nuanced depending on the publishing contract. So many times authors will say to their agent, I don't have any photographers. Who do you think I should work with? Or let's come up with this, a generated list of ideas and run it by the publisher. And there's mutual agreement and consultation along the way. If it's somebody who has a big social platform and has built a big following using their recipes and their images, then they might want to pitch delivering the photos. It's a very big undertaking though. So how the art is handled in a cookbook contract is really nuanced and really runs the gamut.
Okay. Now, if this may tie in, you'll have to tell me. It's been a while since I read this piece, but a few years ago, the New York Times did an article about how cookbook authors were basically doing it for nothing. And I think maybe part of it was because of all of these expenses.
15% of nothing over here.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I assume you read that article. Can you give us the gist, and if it's as bad as that article indicated?
Sure. And I see a question about illustrations in cookbooks too, so I'll address that in a second. I mean, really, it depends. It depends on the advance and how many people are involved in the making of whatever the deliverables are. That article in particular talked about, for the majority of the deals they talked about, I think it was like chef books. So with a chef book, you are, let's say I'm the chef. I'm really good at cooking and I've got great recipes. I don't have great recipes for the home cook. They need to be tested and translated for the home cook. And I probably don't either have the time or the skill, no digs on the chef, to like actually write it, because I'm really good at standing at a hot stove making great food. I'm not as good at sitting at my computer for a dedicated period of time and creating like beautiful literary content. So I need a writer who's my collaborator. I need a recipe tester. I probably need a food photographer. That person also probably needs to hire a food stylist, a prop stylist. We need to rent a studio. And many of those collaborative roles all happen before any of the content is delivered. And so it's probably the author / chef's responsibility to pay those contractors, subcontractors, collaborators out of probably just that first payment I receive in my publishing contract, because on my payment schedule, if I'm lucky enough to work with the big five and even get a 6-figure advance, I'm probably getting only like a third or a fourth. If I, have an agent that's like weighting the payment towards the front, I'm only getting a component of that advance to pay all these people. And if I started tracking my time or, the other fees associated with writing and developing these recipes, even the biggest advances get ticked away very, very quickly. And so I really believe that any book, and particularly a cookbook, because that's the world in which I am an expert, is a big, beautiful business card. It's a calling card for other things. And it is not a retirement plan. However, it's oftentimes a wonderful opportunity to leverage speaking engagements, booking local or national media, maybe headlining at certain food conferences. And so it opens, maybe it's brand partnerships or recipe development, it opens up these other opportunities. And so it's a cost benefit analysis of how and where you spend your money and your resources and your time. And so, the biggest advances I've ever negotiated, the author ends up walking away with something, but it's usually over a 4-year period of time. And all of the people that help make the book are paid in the first or second payment structure. So I just wanted to address the illustration question about photos. Brandy, many books at this point, actually, there's a brand new one right behind me here. This is a reissue of a book that was out many years ago. So a lot of books have illustrated components. They can, when I talk about like an art component of a book, it could be illustrations, it could be illustrations and photos. Those are often two different people delivering that type of art or talent. So those are two different payments and different collaborators. But yes, in the proposal, you propose the book you want to write. So if that's illustrations, cool, include some samples. It doesn't have to be original to the proposal. It can, because that's a out-of-pocket cost to you as an author. It can be samples of the person or the people you want to work with.
We have a question from Becky about the average turnaround time to send in the finished recipes and photos after acceptance.
So typically with the big five and some of the other common cookbook publishers, your publishing timeline is about 2 years. If you sent me a fully perfect proposal today, I signed you tomorrow, and on Tuesday, we got you a cookbook deal. Generally speaking, you'd have 9 to 12 months to deliver your manuscript, and that includes photos, illustrations, art. And then it would go through another 9 to 12 months of editing, copy editing, layout, design, printing, shipping, and distribution. So it's about 2 years. However, if you're doing a book that is super trend-based, or you're working with one of those wonderful tech publishers tech companies that like to think they're publishers, you're going to be working on an accelerated time frame. But generally speaking, it's about a 2-year process, and you would have about a year to deliver your fully tested recipes, your manuscript, and the art. If you need longer, put it in the proposal. Propose the book you want to write and how you want to write it.
Now, does the publisher or editor take any responsibility for testing, or do they just trust the author that they've done their due diligence?
It depends. It depends on the publisher. So we have contracts right now where The contract stipulates that the author is responsible for getting a third-party tester. So there's a cost associated with that. And we have another publisher that we work with that just started writing in, that sends the manuscript and the recipes out for testing on their dime. And then there's plenty of other publishers that are just assuming you are doing your due diligence and working with testers, whether professional formal recipe testers or not, which are two different things. And both are okay. It depends on the publisher, the topic, and sort of what and how you're managing the production of your manuscript.
Anita's wondering if pictures are even necessary. And then there's a separate question about, would the publisher give you instructions on how to take your own photos?
So if you want to take your own photos, you would pitch that and get approval to do so as part of the general deal terms that you or your agent would be negotiating at the top of the deal of the book. You would include samples and essentially get clearance to do it. You would work, depending on the publisher, with an art director ahead of time, whether it's you taking the photos or not, to get direction, and you come up with a shot list, and usually the photographer, the prop stylist, the food stylist, often your editor, many people are involved in that conversation. Do you need pictures? At this point, almost every cookbook or food book that I work on, touch, or read about has some sort of visual component. Does it have to be photos? No. Does it have to be illustrations? No. Could it be both? We're seeing all kinds of things. And many years ago, I negotiated a deal where the author decided to take a slightly lower advance because it was the difference between the publisher being able to afford putting full color photos in throughout the book. And we all felt very strongly that particular topic needed full color photos. And so we took a slightly lower advance in order to accomplish that goal.
Deborah asks about the price difference between color or black and white images used inside a cookbook. And Deborah, I'm not sure if you're talking about the retail price of the cookbook or
I can't actually speak beyond saying there is one, and it's high.
Yeah.
So, Deborah, yes, there is. And what it is on the production side is oftentimes, again, what happens at the top of the deal where a publisher says, we're going to be putting full color, we're going to do a color insert, meaning it just is, a section of pages that have the photography in it. So the rest of the book could be what's called two color. And that might be black and white, or it might be another color and on text, like green and white or so.
Yeah. Dana's wondering if publishers check whether recipes have been lifted from other cookbooks or websites, which kind of gets us maybe into copyright issues or copyright law.
Your contract will stipulate that you're taking on the responsibility to not do so. Some publishers have run into a sticky scenarios where, in fact, recipes had been lifted. And beyond that, there's author responsibilities and publisher responsibilities that are outlined in your contract. But no, don't lift recipes and use them as your own. I know that wasn't the question, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A genre question from Rebecca: if the book is literary with an infusion of recipes, is it hybrid? Is it a cookbook? Where is the line?
So if a book has more than 50, 60 recipes, it's going into cookbook territory. Most cookbooks have somewhere between 75 and 125 recipes, could have more, then obviously definitely a cookbook. Anything less is kind of like single subject territory, even if it's topically not a single subject. If it has like 30 to 55 recipes, it can kind of be marketed and pitched that way. If you are fully text inserting recipes, or it's food narrative, or even just memoir with recipes, or being punctuated by recipes in some way, you're not really in cookbook territory.
Becky wonders about trends that you're seeing in cookbooks that will be coming out in the next few years. And also, are some types of cookbooks overdone? Is there anything that people should maybe set aside because it's saturated right now?
Well, I always counter this question with, what's the purpose of this question? If it's because somebody wants to identify what is a trend and write about it, then there are places you can go to be as sort of up to date as possible on food trends. And then that publishing timeline is, like I said, much faster, because you need to be, if you're not the first book on that trend, fine, but you definitely don't want to be the last. We hear and see like tons of baking books and tons of Italian cookbooks and tons of, fill in the blank. And you kind of wonder, as an industry, how could there possibly be more to say about this? And yet there are those books that continue to come out in those genres. I always go back to the voice and somebody's unique point of differentiation. What is it that you have to say about X topic? And if you can essentially search and replace your passion, then maybe you're a generalist, and that's okay. And I personally believe that we're coming back towards a time of like the general expert in food being a really important role, because we've done a lot of very niche single subject things in the food space. And also right now in particular, there is a desire, demand, and some follow through for these deep cultural dives into different countries and cuisines and places of origin, and really strong first person storytelling as it pertains to food. And I love seeing that. It's something our agency has represented far before it was, of increasing interest from publishers. And I really love seeing more and more of those books pop up. And also I'm getting those pitches, I'm getting pitches about, very unique pockets of the world where a certain cuisine just hasn't been published much before. And that is a wonderful opportunity. And it also goes back to platform, right? I mean, we're not necessarily going to see the same type of platform from authors that are talking about a corner of the world that hasn't been publicized, marketed, or celebrated in many public ways, and in book form specifically.
I know on the self-publishing side, this was, I would say, probably pre-pandemic, there was a huge spike in Instant Pot cookbooks. A lot of people self-publishing those, getting them to market quickly in time for the holiday season, because that was, I think, one of the big gifts that year. And I think it also, there was just a whole kind of upspring of like small appliance cooking, like air fryers and the blenders and so on. Was there a similar thing going on the traditional side? I'm just curious.
For sure. Yes, absolutely. All sorts of appliances, and really publishers are always wondering, what is the next Instapot? Like the Tickle Me Elmo of the counter. I don't know. And so, yes, that definitely would fall into trends that publishers are eager about, curious about. And I sort of saw it go from some of like the smaller, more independent publishers publishing in that space, and then the big five picking like one anchor big name person to write the Instapot book on X. And we saw all sorts of spin-offs and iterations for sure.
Yeah. Back to the photo question. Deborah is wondering if there's any possibility of using royalty-free photos in your cookbook, like from Shutterstock or whomever.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it depends on the book. It, depends on if you're self-publishing or looking to work with a traditional publisher. Some traditional publishers will fill in, ingredient images from Shutterstock, or, it kind of depends on what's the topic and the visual picture you want to paint with the images in your book.
We have another question about the copying or theft, which I know this comes up a lot in relation to recipes. Because my understanding is copyright doesn't protect the recipe itself, like the list of ingredients, but it does. But the description of
the head note,
the description of it is protected. So anyway, Patty is wondering, she's worried that cookbook authors are subject to having others copy their work. And I guess from just the list of ingredients, that is true. But is this something that you worry about, or that your authors worry about?
I am just the kind of person, I mean, legally, these are concerns and considerations that I talk through the ethical author responsibility with my clients. And beyond that, I am not the type of person that will sit in the worry side of the lake. I try to hang out on like the beach where I'm being responsible with my sunscreen and calling it a day. I don't know where that analogy came from. Anyway, You can't copyright a recipe. You can copyright the head notes and the way the instructions are. So your voice, your tone, how it's listed. And in food, there's a lot of gray area and black and white, and it gets sticky. And so do your research, do your homework, and do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure people who love looking at recipes online have encountered this, but like for every New York Times recipe that you can't access because you don't have a subscription, you can probably find like 3 sites that will just list the ingredients.
Yeah.
But not how to cook it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing too is err on the side of I was inspired by, or I would like to request specific permission to use X and feature it in my Y, right? I mean, so there's a whole spectrum of possibilities. And if, when in doubt, or when you're wondering, is this okay or not? If you're working on a traditionally published book, talk with your agent and your editor.
Yeah. Yeah. Nina says, I'm a food nerd. I love nerding out and explaining because I create recipes that look and taste like traditional foods without the grains, the dairy, the egg, the soy, the corn, the almond, cashew, or sesame. That is truly impressive. But she wonders how much teaching and storytelling is too much.
So I think with your work, teaching is probably really important because there are going to be certain culinary, there's going to be some culinary science to either swaps or substitutions. Storytelling is a personal question. So I always encourage people to ask, like, why would someone come to my book for this versus my blog, my website, my social, my class? And the book should have the something else. It should have that spark. It should have you, the personality. I wouldn't, go on for 22 pages about why you don't use sesame, but I would acknowledge, why are you cooking and developing recipes this way? Because there's got to be a story there, right? And I mean, I'm just guessing there's some sort of story there. And I imagine if you've got a story about it, somebody else who also had a moment that they can relate to will be touched, and that's the audience for your book. So in that regards, include that amount of storytelling.
Rhoda says, I was told by a publisher that my manuscript, which includes photos, has to be fully complete for review. Is that true for all publishers?
When they say review, does that mean for editing? I don't know. I would want a little bit more information. Generally, if you're working with a traditional publisher, you would be delivering your version of a fully finished manuscript that, if contractually that includes photos, that's what you also include. Depending on the publisher, some do what's called batch delivery. So you could send them a batch that you could get feedback on, so you have a sense of that you're on the right track. And if there's a hard and fast rule about what you have to or cannot do or not, my agent ears go up as like, something is a little amiss, and I want to know more to make sure that you and your work is being protected in the best way possible.
I'm just guessing, but I'm wondering if Rhoda is one. Rhoda hasn't yet had her project accepted, and the publisher doesn't even want to take a look until it's done.
I would be curious what publisher that is and what Rhoda's goals are in publishing a book, to see if those two things align on the same path.
I mean, in my experience with most nonfiction, you're not expected to have the whole thing finished unless perhaps with memoir, depending on your situation.
Correct. In cookbook publishing, in fact, you would not work on a manuscript. You would work on your proposal first. Yeah.
Okay, so back to the stealing and lifting of recipes or changing of recipes. These issues are always everyone's favorite.
We should also get like you should do a copyright follow-up. Yeah, copyright.
Sure. So Alita is wondering, just how altered does the recipe have to be in order for me to call it my own?
Baseline, minimum 3 ingredients and techniques or changes, generally speaking.
That's fascinating that you have a number. So is this like a kind of a rule of thumb that's evolved over the years?
I believe maybe it's always been 3. I don't know the answer to that, actually. And I believe one of my go-to resources on this is Dianne Jacob and her blog and newsletter, and I know that'll be included in the follow-up resources. And I believe she did a deep dive into recipe copyright recently, so that would be my go-to recommendation.
Cool. Thank you.
And when in doubt, just change more. Just change more. Make it your own and give nod to where inspiration comes from. But if you're looking to traditionally publish, and generally speaking, most of your process is this mine or is it someone else's? I would argue, as an agent, I would work more on your voice, your content, your message, what is your idea, and get it to a place where, no question, this is informed, educated, and inspired by, and now you got your own thing going. You got your voice, your point of view, your unique point of differentiation that warrants a traditionally published book.
That's helpful. Becky asks, I write a recipe column for a local magazine. The recipes belong to me. Is it okay to include some of these recipes in my cookbook? She says she's going to include a disclaimer about that in the proposal. She says some of these recipes were published 2 or more years ago.
Yeah, usually in your publishing contract, there will be a stipulation about how much of the material can have appeared elsewhere. Most of the time, this comes up with like blog to books, and it's generally 10% overlap material is cleared. But again, put it in your proposal and be clear. If there's a bit more or a bit less, you would want to evolve it in some way so that your readers, you're using your column as an anchor as part of your platform, and then building, here's a collection of new content and material so that your readers will be excited to buy your book.
Mm-hmm. Becky asks, how does payment to the agent work?
Sure. Send me all your money. No, I'm just kidding. Literary agents that are part of the AALA, the American Association of Literary Agents or Representatives, they just changed it. So
they did.
Operate on a 15% commission off of the advance and any monies earned on royalties for the life of a project. So monies flow through your agent, meaning when you get your book deal and that first payment comes in, because it's not paid all at once, and it's not right after you do the deal, it's after you wait for the contract and negotiate the contract, and all this time goes by, and then your agent chases it. Once that first payment is released, it's released to your agent, they commission 15%, and then they send you the rest of the funds. Sometimes we'll hold certain funds if we know an author is going to be paying collaborators, because that can help with, taxes and different author executions. So it depends, but 15% commission off of advance and royalties.
So that question has sparked a few of my own about if there are often any sort of subsidiary rights deals, foreign rights deals for cookbooks. I imagine some of this, it might be hard to translate, or there won't be certain ingredients that are available in certain countries, but what's the potential there?
All of those subsidiary rights are outlined in the publishing contract that we negotiate. And then depending on who handles the selling of those rights determines the percentages to the author, which your agent would then commission off of, and to the publisher. For example, I have a book. I don't just work on cookbooks, although it is definitely the majority of what we do at the agency. So I have a parenting book that is coming out in the fall. And because it's parenting, it's a lot easier, or I guess faster in the foreign market to land foreign editions as well. So we're seeing more of, and it's publisher led, handling the sale to foreign editions. In the food and culinary space, it can take a couple years to see foreign edition real traction and momentum get going, although sometimes it happens faster and sometimes it never happens. It really depends.
Naomi wonders, how is voice in a cookbook different than a novel or a memoir?
I don't know, because I mostly only read cookbooks. It's very important in cookbooks. And I imagine it's very important in memoir and in other categories. How it plays out maybe can be a little bit more flexible. You can have a lot of voice. Like if you get me laughing at a head note, which is, the small paragraph before I'm going to make dinner, I'm a happy cook. I'm a happy agent. I'm a happy reader. So it really depends. But I personally, when I read a proposal, the proposal might be great. It might check every single box of what goes into a perfect book proposal. And if I'm not sucked in just because it's not of interest to me, no harm, no foul, I'll pass. Like the voice to me is a really big part of it. I once got completely consumed watching someone eat lunch on the internet. And like, I'm not that kind of person in general. And I was like, what happened? What happened over these past 43 minutes? And then
I asked who it was.
It was Lauren Toyota from Hot for Food. And she used to do this series where she was just like eating. And, it's a big thing on the internet. I work with a lot of internet-based authors, and I work with a lot of people that are not super popular on the internet. And so, I'll hang out in that space, but it's very rare that I'll just like get consumed watching someone eat food. I don't know. And I did. And it was just her personality. It was, her voice on the screen, and it translated, then I contacted her and we worked on a couple books together. And I had a proposal come in, gosh, this was a couple years ago. And I realized I almost read the whole thing in one sitting. I didn't look at my email. I didn't pick up the phone. I just was all in. And so voice is so important to me as an agent, because I want to best represent you by connecting with you and your material. The nuts and bolts, the science of how we put a proposal together, I can teach you that, right? I mean, there's a lot of resources around that. I want to see what you can do in sort of initial draft form. And those are logistics. The art and the sort of sparkle of it is something that, I want to see in a cookbook.
I know when I discovered Allison Roman very belatedly, like after the whole controversy she was in, and I ended up reading her Substack. And she was like one of the first, I'm not like an avid cookbook buyer, but she was, I feel like one of the first people I read where I felt like this person's style, personality, aesthetic is totally embedded in the recipe. And I like it because she's not fussy.
Right.
She's like, just toss around with your hands a little bit. Like, you don't have to, you don't even need a spoon, just a little gentle toss. And she keeps it real. And then there's another person like that, where even if his name's not on the recipe, I can tell it's his. Ottolenghi, that's who it is. And there's just something about the way he writes the header note, and even the ingredients themselves, you can tell it's his.
Yeah, I mean, permission, flexibility, direction, confidence, these are all things that can really resonate with a reader. And particularly when you're talking with home cooks or experienced or comfortable cooks, if you can connect with them, you can help them cook successfully and cook more, right? And many people that write cookbooks, that is their goal. Why should you write a cookbook? If it's purely inward and personal, you may not be ready for traditional cookbook market publishing program. And so there's got to be some other like passion and reason and desire, and your voice can really help accomplish that.
Laura is wondering, what are some of your favorite cookbooks that have come out recently, and what excites you about those titles?
Lori, gosh, well, I love them all for different reasons. I have to say that, right? I am incredibly proud and crushing very hard on a book that came out this past fall called First Generation by Frankie Ga, because it really embodies what I love about what we do as an agency, what I love about the industry at large, and who this author is in particular. It sort of hits all of those notes. It's a first person account of Frankie's lived experience as a first generation Taiwanese American growing up in Ohio, of all places. And it's a book that makes me cry and cook and laugh. And it's gorgeous. And it's got personality to it and great recipes that work. And it's visually stunning. And he's got social support, and he has traditional media support. So it sort of like paints that picture for me of a book that is highly personal, tons of voice, and really hits like the mission of the industry right now, which is, in my opinion, like to touch people in a way that inspires them to cook and connect.
Are there any others you want to mention?
Oh gosh, I was hoping to get away with
I'm just very curious.
Well, so this book behind me, I have to like use my backwards, is the reissue of the Food Substitutions Bible, which Dave Jacob, who is a longtime cookbook collaborator, he's worked on over 50 chef and collaborative cookbooks. He's a go-to writer, but this is a wonderful book for food substitutions. So during the pandemic, I don't even really like to like reissue that. A lot of people were stuck at home figuring out what do I cook with what I've got. And so the publisher reissued the book with hundreds of new substitutions, beautiful illustrations, a cloth spine. Again, it just like it represents certain parts of the industry that I really love and admire. Next to it are two books that we didn't didn't represent as an agency, but also speak to deep first person cultural dives into different cuisines. And so they're not all so good. I obviously, but there's a lot to love out there. So while there's things that I love, there's it's highly personal too. I'd be curious like what other people are loving and resonates with them.
But feel free to share in the chat if there's a cookbook you've
That's
bought
what I was going to
recently.
say.
Yeah.
Throw some stuff in the chat for people who want to share what you're loving right now.
So while we're waiting for some of those suggestions to roll in, there are a couple of questions that are kind of tied in theme or direction. Assam is wondering if there are any current display methods that tie in with the refrigerator display screen that are in today's appliances. That sounds fancy. I don't have that yet. And then there's another one from Naomi about the popularity of physical cookbooks versus e-cookbooks on your iPad at your kitchen counter. So obviously with cooking, there's a lot of multimedia potential there. So can you talk about what publishers are or aren't doing in that respect?
Sure. Generally speaking, publishers are publishing cookbooks in all forms of digital means. So ebook form and sometimes otherwise, but print sales drastically outperform ebook sales in the cookbook market. I'm not exactly sure what the fridge question was, if it was like how to get your recipes on the fridge displays.
I know you might be able to do that with like an Alexa.
Yeah, I have a client who has a relation. So that would be like either a licensing of a book that's already established or a partnership with a brand that has the distribution through those types of mediums and channels, which wouldn't necessarily even be a book. It might be a blog or a YouTube channel or content creation in some way. So how to get on the screen on a fridge is not my expertise, but if you crack that code, I'd be curious to learn more.
Are you familiar with a site called Eat Your Books?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just on the free tier. I haven't really bought into it, but for those who are curious about it, I'm probably going to mess up exactly what it does, but I think you can tell it what cookbooks you own.
So you are not alone in not quite understanding what they do. And since they began, try to distill it as clearly as possible. And hopefully they will say that this is correct. The purpose of Eat Your Books, which is a digital search site and subscription that somebody can have, is to get you back to your physical bookshelf. So what you do is you tell Eat Your Books what cookbooks you have. And then when you're like, I need to make, French onion soup tonight, you go on to their site, because your desire as a cook these days is probably, I want to search for a recipe. The quickest way to do it is online. How am I going to thumb through my books? You go online, you search for French onion through Eat Your Books, and they tell you, hey, you have The Joy of Cooking. And on page 247, there's a recipe for French onion soup. You go back to your physical book, you open it up, and look, you're supporting the sale of physical books again. I'm pretty sure that's what they do.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think on the free tier, which I'm on, you can only tell it about 5 books you own. So if you have a really large collection, that's where they get you.
Speaking of really large collection, just to kind of further drive home our total cookbook nerd enthusiasm here, Lisa, my mom and the founder of our agency, was just awarded the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest personal collection of cookbooks. So I don't know what tier that is in each of your books, but it's high. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Another digital thing that I use is Paprika. Like if I see a recipe online that I really like, and it may or may not be in a book somewhere, but I can digitally save it to like my digital recipe Paprika app, and that's super useful. Okay, there have been a lot of cookbook suggestions in the chat. Thank you all. I see we have the Sous Chefs by Sean Sherman, Ali Slagle's I Dream of Dinner. 52 Shabbats. Arab, I'm gonna butcher that. I don't know how to pronounce it. Arabia, maybe?
Oh yeah, that's this book right here. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Ah, there we go. Yeah, that looks nice.
By Ream, that's a 10-speed book. Yeah. Cool.
Anita wonders, well, I mean, I know this from just looking at books on the shelf. She's wondering if cookbooks should be spiral bound so they stay open, but of course you don't get the spine if something's spiral bound unless it's a paper, like there's a paper over spine option. Expensive.
Most of the cookbooks in the traditional cookbook space right now are not spiral bound. Many do, and authors will say like, I want my book to be able to lay flat. And, you know, if you crack it, I don't want all the glue to break apart. But so it really depends. But generally speaking, most of the cookbooks we work on right now are not spiral bound.
Deborah is wondering, does America's Test Kitchen have its own publishing company?
They do have their own publishing program, yes.
I don't know that they accept outside authors. I think all their content's homegrown.
I believe that is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Rachel's wondering if ebook cookbooks sell like at all.
I love that question. They do. And I'm always, when I look at the royalty statements of our authors, I'm always surprised to see, I have a background, like, well, my undergrad degree is in sociology. And so when I look at royalty statements, it like piques those like early sociology days where I'm like, why did that ebook sell so much, which maybe is like 300 copies in a 6-month period or something. However, when the ebook, generally speaking, and again, everything depends, but generally speaking, the trend is if your publisher deeply discounts your ebook or like gives it away for a very short period of time and you're like, it's for free, it spikes your print copies. So in cookbooks in particular, because not many people are buying the ebook version of a cookbook, I kind of like that. And so I like to see it. And then, you know, when I pull comps from other cookbooks, I get to see, you know, print copies and ebook copies. And so there are, I would say, some of the top selling cookbooks, again, generally speaking, you see some thousands of ebooks as well in their sales reports. And that, you know, the goal is reach the people. And some people are going to buy your book in ebook form, and most in cookbooks will buy it in print form.
Just on a personal note, I have to say, I think it was Ottolenghi's latest cookbook, might have been Flavor. You could actually take a picture of a QR code at the back that gave you the free digital edition, which I loved because then I could save those recipes to my digital cookbook app.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's great. Some cookbooks now are also using QR codes to like show more recipe direction or engage readers because that's the way that they're cooking. And so you, again, published across all formats and platforms.
Nina, who is developing the cookbook that has all of the excluded ingredients, she says she's learned her audience is more than just the food allergy community. You know, it's people who are managing autoimmune diseases, battling chronic conditions. She's wondering, how can I connect with an agent who understands this? So it sounds like she's had some frustration. Maybe my guess is that maybe agents or publishers have found it too niche.
I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily have a lived experience with every one of the clients that I represent. I think the goal is to find an agent that connects with you and your proposal. And if you're looking for an agent that specifically knows how to sell into that market, take a look at some of the comps or other books that are very niche and specific and look at the acknowledgements and see who they thank and maybe sort of reverse engineer from there.
Cynthia wonders who's responsible for the cover of the cookbook.
Oh my gosh, Cynthia, ask the cover comp question. Um, if I could figure out how long I've spent on cover conversations, it would probably equal an unreasonable amount of time that I don't want to actually acknowledge. Generally speaking, it's the publisher's decision. And you as an author, if you're traditionally publishing, will have cover consultation. That's how it would be phrased in your contract. And also your publisher wants you to be happy. And so they want you to like the cover. And so they'll present, depending on the, it depends on the publisher. They'll present cover concepts. And you can say, I like this font, I like this style, I'm looking for these color palettes. Propose and try to control or direct is maybe a better, softer word, the process as much as possible. Here's my mood board, here's my inspiration, here's what I love, here's what I don't love, here's why, here's my fonts, here's my brand colors, whatever it is, give it to the publisher so that your designer has that information. Just last week, I got the first round of cover concepts for a book, and I've really been kind of quiet as an agent, seeing the edits go back and forth. The editor and the author are on track. Everything's good. I'm just kind of watching and observing and seeing when I need to step in. Cover concepts, I needed to step in. I was like, what's happening here? Like, nothing about these covers speak to the concept, the tone, the audience. And it's an evolution. Sometimes you get it on the first try. Sometimes it takes 57 concepts or iterations, and concepts and iterations are not the same thing. 3 cover concepts might be, there's a photo on the cover, there's just text on the cover, there's a photo with illustrations on the cover. Those are concepts, but then you have iterations of each of those concepts. You want, obviously, as an author, to be happy, and you want your publisher to sign off and say, yeah, this cover has been approved by marketing and sales and publicity. Because if you don't have buy-in from the people that are out there selling it, if they don't like your cover, it's not going to go well for you. I once sat with a local indie bookstore owner when she was deciding which cookbooks to bring into her store, solely so I could experience on her end what the cover decision looked like. And the process went like this. She sat here, I sat here, and she scrolled through, and it was through Amazon, and was looking at the tiny little thumbnails. And she was like, yeah, I'm going to order 2 copies of that book. I think it's going to do well in the store. And I'm like, 2 copies? Why? What's up with this cover? She's like, well, this topic has sold well for us before, and I like the color. And I was like, that's it. And then she moved on to the next one. I'm like, whoa. I meanwhile, I'm spending a tremendous amount of time in advocacy, making sure that the cover concepts are landing right. So this was a very long-winded answer to, it is ultimately the publisher's decision. And there are many people that need to touch it successfully along the way for it to resonate in the marketplace and online.
Changing gears, yeah. Beth wonders how involved you are, or agents in general, in collaborating with and advising a client on their career in food and books, like what should they write next or what should they write first? And do you ever team up before someone's proposal is fully done?
I will answer the second question first by saying yes, I do. I both actively scout and also will be happy to review a draft proposal if I'm interested in working with someone and we've sort of established it doesn't need to be fully finished. And we, as an agency, have our hands pretty involved in the career development. We work with a lot of first-time authors, like I said, throughout their entire food and publishing career. And that is often, through books and other forms of work as well. Different literary agents work in different ways, and our agency is not just a literary agency. And so, when you're looking at agents or doing research, take a look at some of the other services or, historical information that they have available to see what might be a right fit for you.
Do you have any thoughts about ghostwriters? Do you know of any good cookbook ghostwriters?
I do, and I think they are essential. I think it's really, unless you are a writer and a cook and a recipe developer, which are 3 different skill sets, and many authors are, it's totally appropriate to say like, hey, I really love creating ideas about what I want this recipe to be, or developing this recipe, but I don't know how to write and talk about it and fit in the rest of my life and storytelling. And ghostwriters can be really, really helpful with that. We have a non-exclusive list of people that we work with and represent on a non-exclusive basis that we call our a la carte providers. And those are people that are seasoned ghostwriters, recipe testers, photographers, and other components of making a cookbook, so that when somebody says, I'm looking for a ghostwriter, can you make a suggestion? I can say, hey, let me figure out a little bit about who you are, what you're looking for. I'll suggest maybe a couple of people to interview, and you can see if it's a good fit. And if somebody's looking to be a ghostwriter, that's really hard.
Yes.
And please keep yes, we need more ghost and name collaborators. I think there's something to be said, at least in the cookbook space, because named collaborators are very big, common, standard part of the process, that it's totally appropriate and okay to name your collaborator if that makes sense for you and your brand and book.
Anita's wondering, how is the author's royalty calculated?
It depends on the publisher. So often, always, you should have escalators, meaning after a certain number of copies sold, you then make a little bit more per book sold, and it depends on your publishing contract. And even down to like net versus gross.
Joanne says she has some cookbooks from community women's groups of the 1960s, and she's wondering if she needs to trace those people, like their descendants, for permission to publish.
Ooh, it depends how you're publishing them, and I don't know.
Yeah.
If you're reprinting or publishing content, even from a community cookbook of some kind, I imagine that there's some element of permission required.
Yeah, lots of variables there, but I would assume you'd need someone's go ahead or permission on that.
There's a food writer and professor whose name is escaping me at the moment, who would be my go-to ask and resource for this. And so if you're working on this, and you email me after, I can look up that name and make an introduction.
All right, I'm going to switch to the slides because you have a resource list that I just want people to know about. We're going to include these resources in the follow-up email that alerts you to the fact the recording is available. But I just wanted Sally to discuss them briefly here so you know what you're going to be looking at. And there it is.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is my go-to resource list for anyone looking to start, stay, or make an impact in the food and authorship space. We have what's called Cookbook Academy on our website. I have a course teaching people all about how to write cookbooks. If you should self-publish, traditionally publish, you get a lot of me in virtual digital form, but at your own pace. And then we have our proposal guidelines, which is an open resource for anybody. They would be comprehensive enough to pitch any sort of cookbook agent. It is not unique to our agency. I moderate a Facebook group called How to Be a Cookbook Author, and you get information about the industry. I post a lot of Jane's content in there because it's just one of my absolutely favorite go-to resources and recommendations for anyone looking to get into writing. I'm skipping around, but the Everything Cookbooks podcast is also an open free resource. Devour it if you're remotely interested in writing about and working and networking in this space. And then there's some other industry resources here that you can click through and sort of find your own path and discovery. But our submission guidelines, the Facebook group, the podcast are really great free resources as a place to start. And when you're ready for a deeper dive, let me know.
Wonderful. And just to reiterate, those resources the links will be in the follow-up email that you get. And if you're watching this on YouTube, just look in the YouTube notes or description and all the links will be there waiting for you. Okay, last question. I hope it's a fun one for you. We'll both answer it.
Okay. Your
favorite recipe to cook?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, this is a really transparent moment here. I am educated and inspired by recipes and very rarely follow them.
That's
So
honest.
do with that what you will. Yeah, I love to read recipes, and I read a lot of them and devour the information, and then I just kind of go my own way. And I love spicy food, so there's always like, it's just never spicy enough in the recipe for me.
Well, one of my very favorite recipes to cook, especially if I have company over, is the cover recipe on Jerusalem by Ottolenghi. It's just so
Such a good one.
simple,
Yeah,
delicious, and you can't go wrong.
such a good one. Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you to everyone participating. It is really important to me to be a resource in this space, and I have loved the opportunity to hang out with all of you this afternoon.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you all for joining us on this Sunday, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye, everyone.